Hey, Rising Church. Hope you're all doing well and you're off to a great start this week in your groves. We are coming to the final couple weeks here in our study in Luke, and we're going to come to what I think are some really fascinating chapters and things to really consider and think about, discuss, and I hope that you will. Before we do that, I want to ask you for something and to do something. Each session of Groves, we take a special collection at the end of each session that goes towards our Grove babysitters. We have a lot of high school students that are currently watching all the little kids of a lot of these young families so that they will be able to participate in a Grove. And that's something that we as a body want to encourage, we want to enable so that we can have these young families be able to participate during a time of life where it's often difficult to afford a babysitter or to take off the time and get away with kids that are sick and all that. And so we want to be able to provide that for them. And so we want to ask everybody who's a part of a Grove, whether you have kids or not, or whether you have kids that are in your Grove or not, to give towards this. And what we do is we'll take all that money and we'll distribute it to each of the Grove babysitters to fund their mission trips for next summer. So really it's a win-win-win as we invest not only in the next generation of students and kids, but also the next generation of parents. So I just want to ask all of you to dig in and provide that and give that. So we'll have that collection over the next couple of weeks. But as we shift into our final couple of weeks here in Luke, you probably noticed in your reading this week that Jesus is starting to come into battle or conflict or this adversarial relationship with these chief priests and elders and Sadducees and scribes. And what's happened is Jesus entered Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is not like Galilee 2,000 years ago or today. It's like when you go to Galilee today, it's very peaceful, it's kind of calm, it's agricultural. But when you get to Jerusalem, it's just urban, it's chaos, it's loud, it's busy. And the same was true 2,000 years ago. When Jesus enters Jerusalem, he enters kind of the center of Judaism, because this is where all the religious elite are located. This is where the center of Judea is, because that's where the temple is. And so Jesus is going to start having a lot of conflict with people that he hasn't had conflict with before. In the past, in Galilee, he's been mostly in conflict with the Pharisees, who are the local teachers in the local synagogues. And so these guys are, they're smart, but they're not the elite. And when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, he's dealing with the uppity crust of Judaism, the established aristocracy, the established order. These are the smartest of the smart. And it's like kind of ironic, actually, because Jesus in Luke chapter 2, if you remember all the way back when Jesus was 12, he goes to Jerusalem and his parents, forget him. They leave him there and they find him finally a few days later. And where's he at? He's listening and he's asking questions of all these teachers of the law and all these bigwigs, scholars of Judaism. And they're all impressed with him at 12 years old. But fast forward, Jesus is, 20 years later, 32 or so, 33, 34. And now they're threatened by him. The same, could have even been the same people. But now they're threatened by Jesus because they see him as a threat to the established order. He's a threat to Judaism, and he's a threat to their kind of position and their authority. And that's why they start to question, like, who gave you this authority to speak? And who do you think you are? And they're starting to have these conflicts with Jesus. And it's interesting. I want you to take some time, really. I just want to ask you to do this is when this video is over, to go read Jeremiah chapter 7. Because I feel like Jeremiah chapter 7 really lays out the conflict you're going to see between Jesus and the Sadducees and the chief priests. It lays forward with Jesus as he starts to talk about the temple and the future of the temple, which is going to be destroyed 30 some years after Jesus in 70 AD by the Romans. And Jesus starts to project that. He starts to say, this is what's coming. And it's interesting because Jeremiah did the exact same thing in Jeremiah chapter 7, right before the first temple, Solomon's temple, was destroyed by the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar. And now the same thing's about to happen. And Jesus is trying to tie those two together, saying, hey, this is the same reason that it happened before is about to happen again. And so I think that will help you understand what Jesus is talking about. But Jesus does quote Jeremiah chapter 7 when he gets to the temple in the first place. And he shows up at the temple after Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry. All the common people think Jesus is going to be the king. He's going to be the Messiah. He's going to put things back the way they're supposed to be. And that's why they're laying all the palm branches in front of him. That's why they're saying these messianic prophecies of blessed is the name of the Lord and all these things that they're doing. And the Pharisees, or not the Pharisees, but the Sadducees and chief priests are like, hey, back off. Tell these people to back off. You're not the Messiah. And Jesus is like, hey, if these guys don't cry out, then rocks will cry out, right? Remember all that? But Jesus goes to the temple. And interesting that the way this temple is set up is there's different courts. And the inner court is, the inner, the Holy of Holies, only the high priest can go. And then there's the court of priests where only the priest can go. There's the court of men, and then there's the court of women, and then there's called the court of Gentiles. And the court of Gentiles is supposed to be this area of the temple where if you weren't Jewish, you were Gentile, you could go and worship Yahweh, worship God. But in the meantime, the Jews had turned that area into a swap meet, basically. Kind of a flea market. And so Jesus comes in, and if you remember what he says two things. He says, "It is written," he said to them, "my house will be a house of prayer." And he quotes Isaiah. And in this passage of Isaiah, it's actually the fullness of it says a house of prayer for all nations. And he says, this is not what this place is. This is not a place where everybody can come and meet me. And he says again after that, "But you have made it a den of robbers," which is quoting Jeremiah chapter 7. So that's where I want you to read Jeremiah 7, because I do think it's going to kind of tie all this stuff together. It's going to make it make sense, what's going on here. Why is Jesus talking about the temple and the destruction of that? Because Jesus, as we've talking about in our series in Hebrews, is greater than religion. He's greater than Judaism. He's greater than the temple. He's greater than the temple sacrifices. He's greater than the high priest. And so something is here that is greater. But they will not accept it. They're going to reject it, just like they rejected all the prophets that God sent them. They're going to reject the Son, which is why Jesus is going to share this parable. So read Jeremiah 7, and hopefully that will help make some sense of this stuff that you're about to read. You're going to have a great discussion, lots of interesting things to talk about. So dive into it, talk about it, discuss, argue, encourage, and just have a good time with it. So hope you're off to a good week, and we will see you next time.